All right, we're going to go ahead and call the June City Commission work session to order. Al, roll call.
Excuse me, Brunick.
Here.
Johnson.
Present.
Minor.
Here.
Schramm.
Here.
Mybaum.
Here.
Weber.
Present.
Villanueva.
Present.
Mayor Mosier.
Here.
City Manager Leon.
Here. I believe the city attorney is still on the call with the medical marijuana initiative, so he's out in his car. I know he's in the parking lot, but we'll keep going on this. I'm going to ask if there's anybody here from the public that wants to make an appearance before the city commission on something that's not on the agenda for the work session tonight. Seeing none, tonight's work session meeting is all about the city budget, fund balance, and CIP. So I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Leon.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor Mosier, member of the commission, members of the commission, department heads, and public. A little bit of housekeeping first. Colleen put together some snacks for us, so if you're famished, there's some snacks, and department heads, you can help yourself, and there's water as well. We reconfigured our room back to our normal setting. If you don't like where you're sitting or don't like who you're sitting with next to, you can switcheroo. We just like to keep the mayor in the middle. So if you want to switcheroo between meetings or anything, some of you keep things in your drawers in front of you. So if you want to change anything out, please do. I thought tonight we'd start out talking a little bit about the fund balance document that we sent you in your packet. Earlier this year, you asked for a little bit of an overview of some of the various funds. And so we tried to include them all. And the purpose for tonight is to not get hung up on those numbers. And Al and I can talk about why in a little bit, but to have a general understanding of the fund itself. And then start going through the CIP and talk about the CIP in general, but focus primarily on this year and 2022. So if that works for all of you, I ask you to interrupt me if you have questions or concerns or things you want more information on. We'll just start talking about the funds in general. And the numbers are only as good as the time that Al wrote them down. So we have not reconciled 2020 yet. So there's still changes in 2020. And of course, 2021 is unknown. So what I hope doesn't happen is for someone to jot a number down and say, you know, on June 28th, you said we had this many $100,000 in said fund. We still have a long way to go, but we just took a snapshot in time and recorded it. And I'm assuming that in some instances, these are maybe even rounded numbers in the sense that we don't have the exacts yet. So don't want you to get too hung up on numbers. We're a little bit behind where I think we typically would be in a normal year just because of the pandemic, and then also some of our funds that are planning to come in. Later on, Lisa Yardley will tell you where we are at with our ARP, American Rescue Plan funds. And we also heard that today or last week, a bill was passed for additional infrastructure funds at the federal government, whether or not that's signed or not. So there'll be a lot of change over the next couple of years, more than we're used to in fund balances. So with that, I'll just talk a little bit about the funds quickly, and please interrupt me if you'd like. The 100 general fund are the funds that you're used to seeing. Those are the ones we talk about in terms of being funded by the first and second penny, primarily first penny. So that's operational funds for your board, for the city attorney, for city manager's office, and many of our departments. So you see police, fire, finance office, street department, all those, airport, not capital, but airport general fund, community library, all those things, parks and recreation that all the services that we provide. The general fund is why it's so important that we encourage people to shop locally, because if you have trouble and you call 911, it's not the fire department from Sioux City or the police department from Sioux Falls that comes. It's usually our police department and our fire department. So that's why it's so important that we shop locally, and so that as tax revenue comes back in, it goes into that general fund. We also have in the what we call the 201, which is all these numbers are just really the beginning account number for each fund. In the 200 series, we have special revenue funds, and those are to account for the proceeds of specific revenue sources. So we can point you to where we have all those specifics down, but you know, the Parks and Recreation and city special events, that's a transfer from the general fund into that fund. So Summit Activity Center would be a good example of that. Huther Family Aquatic Center, primarily funded by the general fund. It's transferred into, so the operation, or the expense of the project will be transferred in. Marne Creek as well is another one of those examples. Casualty Reserve, the Bridge and Street Fund, 911 Dispatch, that's one where we are able to receive funding from the E911 board from the E911 fund that's housed, I guess, for lack of a better term right now, at the county. And then some of the ones that you're also used to talking about, the bid board, that's the hotel tax, the room tax, the BBB, or the bed, board, and booze, the infrastructure and revolving loan fund, as well as cemetery and perpetual care fund. So some of you may remember that we had indicated it was somewhere in the neighborhood, the cemetery perpetual care was somewhere in the neighborhood of 150. So that's correct, the number we gave you before, and I can't remember it entirely, but there's also other elements in that fund as well, other items in that fund as well. Next to those funds, all the funds that I've mentioned, you see what liabilities we have. So we don't want you to just think that this is the sort of cash balance. Those are put in there to understand that, you know, we continually have dollars in, dollars out. So continuous stream of revenue and expenditures. Permanent funds, we don't have any of those. I don't know, Al, if you want to provide some kind of an example of what a permanent fund would be. The description we put was to account for resources that are legally restricted to the extent only earnings and not principal may be used to support reporting the government's programs. Do you have any examples of what those would be, Al?
Excuse me, we haven't had one since I've been here, so I'm not even really sure what's included in that, so.
Yeah. Okay. So in the 500 series, we have all the capital project funds. So those are funds like public improvements, airport capital, park capital. We're going to talk more tonight about all those types of capital. Infrastructure improvement, aquatic center, again. And then we have our tax increment districts. So you can see all of those listed there. We included them all. There's a number of proprietary funds, which is the 600 series. You know this guy over here. He's the proprietor, the main proprietor of the proprietary funds. The water fund, and that's one we'll talk about when we get closer to talking about rates in the budget and operating the budget. Wastewater, solid waste and recycling, but also cemetery and joint powers, Fox Run Golf. So you can see there, you know, the types of funds that are considered the proprietary funds. Questions so far?
If I could interject just a little bit, getting back to balances, you know, when we first started this discussion, I got the impression that commissioners were interested in our cash balance. And I wanted to make sure you understood that, first of all, the current balance is your current assets minus current liabilities. And so I wanted to make sure you saw the liabilities too, so that you understood. For instance, a very simple one is 201 Parks and Rec. The fund balance is $61,627. Literally, most current assets are cash. We do have some accounts receivable. That's money that we expect to receive that's counted. And we also have inventory that's counted. Most of the inventory is in and out type things, you know, so it kind of is flexible and kind of like cash, because by the time we get rid of that inventory, we've already bought some more and it became an expense and a liability. But I wanted to make sure you understood that when we talk about having 61,000 in Parks and Recreation, that's not flat cash that's ready to spend. We have current liabilities of 41,000, leaving a net of about 20,000. The way we do our journal entries at the end of the year, we take current assets minus current liabilities, and then in most cases, I try and leave them a little operating cash so that they don't start out January 1st in the negative. And that also makes it more lined up year to year, because liabilities can change. They may have a $41,000 liability this year, next year it may only be $5,000. So that's why there's that difference between cash and net cash, so to speak, when we talk about balances. The other catch is, and again, these are accounting rules and principles, not mine. I just try and follow the rules and principles. What the city of Yankton is also under is what we call a modified accrual system. So when we talk about current assets and current liabilities, liabilities go through January 31st of the next year. And that's the same thing with receipts. By going under the modified accrual system, we go above and beyond that. We know on January 31st what is coming in yet or came in January. We also know how many bills we have to pay. What we don't know is those late bills. And by late, I don't mean that they're late because we haven't paid them. It's late because the person asking us to pay them hasn't submitted it yet. So, for instance, Kyle's large wastewater treatment or water treatment plant, we'd have bills that were coming in 2 months after they were currently a liability to us. So in February, we may get a bill for $6 million for the water treatment plant. Even though that's not considered current, under the modified accrual system, if we know that before we finish our report, we have to include that as a liability. So that goes above and beyond the current assets and the current liabilities. That's why it gets so complicated to try and come up with an answer to you when you say, how much cash do we have on hand? I can tell you at any moment in time, real quickly, what our cash balance is, but it's not a net cash balance. I can tell you what the cash is, but I can't tell you how much of that is owed out without filing and going through all of our paperwork on liabilities and accrued liabilities. So that's where it gets hard to explain to you to be careful when you hear a balance. You'll hear a cash balance often on the city, and you'll look at the total and you go, wow, we have a lot of cash. Yes, we do. We also have a lot of liabilities to pay, and we had a lot of restrictions for what it can be spent on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that fund to fund. Water is a perfect example. When you look at the sheet and you see that our water balance right now is over $9 million. Keep in mind, that's part of the process of the 4-year improvement plan we went through and 4 years of surcharge increases that led us to a brand new well to the east of town and a brand new water treatment facility. We were the benefit of a 4-year program to start increasing those surcharges, not to dump it on the citizens all in 1 year, but it took 4 more years to pay off and to draw that debt down. So we've gained balance in there. When we first talked about the whole plan, our projection was 0 growth. And we did that so we wouldn't get caught shorthanded at the end of the 4 years and say, you know, we got a problem. We still owe a lot of money. We're in the hole. We've got the adverse problem in water right now. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later is my suggestion now that we're through this, and again, this gets complicated. Right now in water, we have 6 loans outstanding. 4 of them, they're all SRF loans. 4 of them were prior to the new well that's east of town and the water treatment plant. We have enough to pay those off now and not be threatening our balance or our cash liquidity in water. And that's what I'll be suggesting. But it isn't as simple as suggesting it to you. We also have to get permission from the state to pay off any loans early. It's because of the whole SRF program and the state's wanting to have good cash flow that they don't let you just pay it off because you want to. I don't see a problem with that, but we literally have to ask for permission to pay off those first 4 loans. 5 and 6 are the 2 newest loans, and that's for the the collector well and the treatment plant. Those, we aren't even close. You know, we owe almost 50 million on those 2 loans alone. There's no plans to pay those off early yet. But we do have a surcharge in place that right now looks like it's going to be a little bit more than the annual debt service. The annual debt service, again, according to state regulations, is 110%. You can't just have 100% coverage. To borrow an SRF right now, you have to have 110% coverage. That 10% coverage is going to sit in the bank and continue to grow, and the only thing we can do with that is ask for permission to pay off some of our principal early, and/or there's talk within the state to get permission to use that for capital improvements in the future as you build that up. But that's not even approved yet. Right now, it's not a rule. It's 110% has to be set aside. That 10% you don't pay annually just continues to grow. And it's the state wanting to make sure that we're responsible and reliable about not getting caught behind the 8 ball when it comes to the next big project that I'm sure Kyle will find a way. And again, we kid Kyle, but all of this is, probably the one thing I'm going to look down on when I finally do leave is the debt that we've incurred under my role as the finance officer. It's not like we're proud of debt. It's just like at home, you owe that money. But I like to think that because of the commission's understanding and being progressive, we've got very good infrastructure. Water's a perfect example. Because of your progressive take on this, we have a healthy system. We're not going to get caught behind the 8 ball.
Great. Did you want to stand up here and do the right? Because you did a better job than I did.
I've taken enough of Amy's time.
No, that was awesome. And I'm also really glad at home we don't have to report what we plan on spending later. Thank goodness for that. The 800 series is kind of interesting because it's something I didn't realize happened before I got into government. So internal service funds, central garage is one of those for us. So central garage kind of takes care of all of our equipment and Kevin Colhavy and his team do all our oil changes, many of our repairs to our vehicles. Well, we have to keep tabs of all that and report all that and account for all that. So that's kind of an internal operation within our operation. We have some private purpose trust funds. The library has one such fund. The library has a trust that was established some time ago. Dana doesn't let me just spend that on whatever, book that is coming out on, Goodreads.com, there's guidance for that as well. And so that isn't money that I can recommend to you either to spend. So her board talks about that. That's different than something like Friends of the Library. That's a separate entity. And we also don't have that checkbook either. But it does help our services. There is I thought that the one that's at 703 would catch your eye, the Historical Easement Trust Fund. That was established for the, is it called Sir Charles Apartment Building? I forget the name of the historic building, but I always call it the courthouse building because I think that was where the trial was for Jack McCall. But when that building was redeveloped, there was a historical easement fund set. So those funds could only be used to repair the easement of that particular building. Well, I don't know if anybody's walked by or looked at that building, but I think it's granite and brick, so it doesn't really need a lot of work. And, I wanted to bring it up and talk about it because I thought some of you might go, wow, is that something we should be doing for our buildings? Well, yes, if we have a few more Dave Mingos and a lot more funds to put there, because it would take someone, we would have to establish guidelines for that. And we would have to, establish funds for the facades and determine which, so it is a possibility. Some places do such things like that. They certainly don't have more capable departments than we do, but maybe more robust. So I just wanted to bring that forward in case someone saw that and thought, I wonder what that is. To my knowledge, we've never spent any money out of that fund. And, should that building ever fall into disrepair, we'd probably have to take a look at that fund, but $23,000 isn't going to go very far when it comes to that building. So the 711 fund, what we call employee benefit or pension trust fund, those are required to be held for the members and beneficiaries of defined benefit pension plans, contribution plans, other post-employment plans. So that's what the 700 series is. The general capital assets are capital assets for you that are not specifically related to reported proprietary fiduciary funds. And Al, if you want to translate that for us, you can. The general capital assets are associated with general government activities. So, Al, do you have a more understandable
Probably the quickest
explanation
example
for
I can
that?
give you on that is your parks and your streets. They all have, it's a capital asset, it's got value. Again, it's a fixed asset, it's not easily marketed, so to speak. But part of what's required by accounting services, again, is giving bondholders the idea that, oh, by the way, they have this much in assets right now. And that's probably the two biggest ones, that roads, bridges, parks. It literally is none of Kyle's 600 series. So that's probably the quickest I can come up. Dwayne, did you have another? Public buildings, yeah, City Hall. Some activity, no, I take that back. Some activity center is a little different.
Library.
Because that's got, yes, library would be another one. So that's a number you want to see growing, but it's only going to grow according to what the value of our assets is minus the depreciation too. So we may have put in a street 10 years ago that was $10 million that now on our books is like maybe $6 million because it isn't worth 10 million more. And it would cost us much more than the 6 million to replace it again. So, but that's a number that you don't want to see continually dwindling. You want to think you're healthy enough that there'll always be some small rise in that, just not so that we're sitting on extras, so to speak.
Right, and I presume the aquatic center's not in that number yet because it's 2020.
Not yet. It will be.
Yep. Our long-term liabilities, of course, are the debts that we have, not associated with some of the enterprise debt, but like the fire station, the building of the fire station, and then the, Huther Family Aquatic Center. If you were to build another public building of some type, that would be that kind of debt as well. I realize that was a very quick explanation, but I wanted to leave some time for you to ask Al and Lisa or I, or Dwayne, what questions you might have about fund balances that we can either go back and get numbers for, or we can give you explanations for tonight.
Amy mentioned later on that you're going to kind of go through what can be spent where and directed accordingly, right? Is that later on?
Well, we can talk about that now a little bit if you'd like. So, we're restricted just like we're restricted, and the way it was always explained to me is, think about it as different buckets. Some buckets you can pour into one bucket and another, but there are some buckets you can't. So we can't, because we have a balance in our water fund, we can't give everybody across the city, a bonus out of that. That's not how that works. So it depends upon, if you'd like to know all those rules, that's going to take some doing to put together. But that's really how it works. I mean, there's some ways you can spend the money and some you can't. Just like when we get a grant, we're restricted. If we get a COPS grant, that has to be used for those funds. We can't then use those grant funds for a water improvement or a parks improvement. So much the same in our budget, according to the statute and the funds that are set up. There's certain things we can spend and certain things we can't. Now, in that fund balance document, I added some of them have South Dakota codified laws numbers next to them. The bid board, the triple B, I put the ones in that I get asked the most about, the second penny, the ordinances that our ordinances or the statute that pertains to those. So it should give you a little bit of guidance on what you can spend where. So the BBB is not for funding, streets. There are some ways that you can fund engineers or architects out of that for public improvements, but there's restrictions on that fund. So when Yankton decided to set up that fund, it agreed to those state restrictions. So if you have questions about that or a particular fund, we're happy to describe that, but some are restricted by statute and some are restricted by ordinance. Now, some cities don't restrict their second penny. So I'm glad Yankton does, and I'm glad Yankton has specific uses for that. Canton, for example, first and second penny was just open. Well, what I felt happened then is I felt like we didn't keep up as well with infrastructure. So you'll sometimes hear us joke and we'll say Adam's penny as the second penny, because a lot of that goes into the infrastructure improvements that he and his department design and bid out. But we've restricted that also to include some improvements like the Summit Activity Center and some other specific things, and that's in our ordinance. You can change that ordinance. It might be, I might have my own over my dead body moment on that one, but you can certainly do that to make it, more open for the general fund. And some cities need to do that, but that's worked well for us in terms of making sure that we're always making sure we're prioritizing our infrastructure. Other questions about the fund balance or fund balances?
I have a general question for Al. You had mentioned as part of previous state applications, SRF fund applications, that I would assume more often than not, we've stated projections of 0% growth for the city. How often would you say that was actually accurate? For all the applying that we've had to do over the years for various reasons, how often have we actually only ever hit 0% growth?
Rarely. But again, keep in mind, like especially on the water one, we were looking out for 4 to 5 years. We wanted to make sure that we weren't going to come up with a surprise at the end of those 4 years and tell you that, oh, by the way, not only are we behind the 8 ball, we have to have a larger increase than what we've already accepted and ordinance and had, and so that's why we were so conservative about that. And that was a discussion that all of you had in budgetary sessions, that when we talked about that, most other loans that we put out for are small enough that we don't project zero growth. It was just on the water fund. Part of that was also complicated because of the whole BY settlement, because even though we're growing as a community and growing in our water consumption and stuff, some of that we don't collect a surcharge for. Any of the BY customers don't pay a surcharge. So it was important that we kept that in mind. We were hoping for growth, but the growth had to be within the corporate city limits at the time that we lost our BY case, so to speak. That's why we were a lot more conservative about that one. Almost no other ones did we put down zero growth.
So just as kind of an add-on to what Al's talking about, in all actuality, we've actually experienced negative growth in addition to the increases in the rates. So this is not all of our history, but if you look at metered sales, this is water. So from 17 to 18 to 19, we shrunk our revenue. And that was years that we had increases. And then in 19 and 20, we've seen a projected increase. But that all has to do with water sales, how hot it is. So there's a lot of volatility in utilities based on user consumption.
I might add on that, this is a classic example of what can happen. We really did expect some compression on usage because of our increases. But what we found out that is, in reality, the biggest effect on consumption is the wet and dry years. And so far, this has been a very dry year. The consumption, after 4 years of increases, is going through the roof. And it's because it is so dry so early. Even the 2 past years, we had pretty substantial moisture through about June on into July. Because that got us through the worst of the heat and the worst of the billing, the people still use less. This year, you can see people are deciding that they don't want to lose their lawn, and their consumption has went sky high. I do a report on that too, and I did not bring that with me tonight, but I believe the last consumption, the last month, was almost 40% increase in consumption over the same month a year ago. After 4 years of increases, that had nothing to do with our increases. That had to do with the dry weather and people deciding they weren't going to let their lawns or some of their outdoor watering be ruined.
Just to kind of add to that a little bit. So on water and wastewater, we've been using in the range of 0.6 to 0.8 for the elasticity of demand, which means that for every increase, 1% increase, we end up with about 0.6 to 0.8% of revenue from it. Whereas opposed to like solid waste, where it's a monthly flat fee, that demand's inelastic. So a 1% increase in solid waste results in 1% increase in revenue. So depending on, the size of the increase, what that impacts to the customer, we kind of use a little bit of a sliding scale to project what that really ends up being with net revenue. There's a certain, diminishing returns and economics based on how much you increase the cost of the goods and how much satisfaction the customer gets out of it. But that kind of gives you an idea of the range of return based on the increase and how that kind of impacts the budget.
Other questions on fund balances? Or other direction for us on fund balances? If not, I'm excited to start talking about capital. Already? Okay. So your capital improvement plan, I'd like you to take a look at the cover first. This is a young, this is from the Huther Family Aquatic Center. This is a young, focused Dwayne with laser vision, knowing what we should aim at and knowing how we should spend our money. So we got a giggle out of that. For those of you that are new to looking at this, if there is a highlight, that means there's, an increase or a change in funding. If it's in the yellow, if it's green, it's typically a decrease. It's a decrease in the funding. So I'm going to talk primarily about 2022. I'll reference things in 2021, and if you see something in the out year that tickles your brain and you want to talk about it, let me know. 23, 24, 25, some of those things are ideas, more or less, that we've put in, so we continue to talk about them with you and with future commissions. Doesn't necessarily mean they're for certain going to happen, and it certainly doesn't mean that the funding's there. So if you look at it that way a little bit, it's nothing that's being decided. And remember, if you have a project that's not here that you want to see here, if you see something in the out year that you think absolutely needs to get done sooner, this and the next few weeks is a good time to let us know, so we can talk about that with you as a group, and we can make changes if we need to. Not a lot of capital when you look at the city manager's office, finance, information services typically, but I do want to mention that we've talked for a couple of years about our AS400 replacement. We do need to make some upgrades, and then we need to look at replacing that AS400, and that is the program that talks to our financial program. So, and Dwayne, I don't know if you want to explain it a little better, but we're operating on a system that we've been operating on at least since I've been here, probably quite a bit longer, and it's time to upgrade that system. So we've put it off a long time, and it's probably time that we start looking at transferring that over. So that's what you see in the capital and finance, which typically finance doesn't have that kind of capital. We also have updating, and as you look down to community development, updating the City of Yankton Comprehensive Land Use Plan. So I believe we're required to do that every 20, is it 20 years? That's advisable. Oh, it's advisable to do that every 20 years. Ours is circa 1997? 03. So it's time. So that's over a span of 2 years, so that will be done with the help of a consultant, and that will be not our strategic plan, but the comprehensive land use plan. So think zoning and land use. Not a lot of capital in human resources, of course. Did I miss? No, I didn't miss City Hall, because I want to talk about City Hall a little bit. But in police, we have we have vehicle replacements. The issue there won't be that we need them. The issue there will be, can we get them? So we'll have some vehicle replacements we'll propose to you. A K9 unit. We're looking at replacing K9 Reno with a new K9 and K9 handler. So we've added that this year because, as you know, we retired K9 Reno. So we're looking at that. That also takes a number of years a number of months to acquire a dog, to get the training and get the officer trained. So we have in next year's budget additional radios, which we need to keep replacing and upgrading those as well. We also have an e-ticket system. So, we know that going forward in all our departments, and we'll talk a little bit about that in solid waste as well, but in all our departments, we have to look at ways that we can utilize technology to help our people do their jobs for a couple reasons. One, we want to make it seamless. That was one of the values we talked about for our employees. And technology is something that employees like to have, but that's really the ancillary reason too. In the labor market that we're in, people don't stay here for 20, 30, 40 years. We need to have a little more flexibility and versatility in being able to train people and make things, set up systems to make it easier for folks to do their jobs. E-tickets is one of those ways. So this is basically not having an officer handwrite you a ticket, but there's a handheld device, I guess for lack of a better term, and they can, by using a series of clicks, Roston Herder was speeding, he was driving recklessly, he was playing his music too loud, and by those touches, prints the electronic ticket, there's no discrepancy, he parked wrong, he did a U-turn, he did a lot of bad stuff. So that's something we've talked about for a number of years, and something we're putting in the budget for next year for you to consider.
So we can basically Venmo our ticket money right over to the city?
I don't know if that includes payment. It doesn't include payment, no. You still have to either give us a check, or if you could pay the county by, I don't know if you can pay your tickets online. I haven't gotten a ticket in a long time, so I don't know that. But that technology too, I think, will also make them more efficient at traffic stops. And not that we're trying to produce traffic stops, but certainly when we are shorthanded, which is often right now, it's good to be able to make sure those folks in the field can get done what they need to do in a short order of time. So that is police. When we talk about fire, there isn't a whole lot to talk about next year, but we are replacing the SCBA equipment incrementally. Looking out in the out year, you see that engine number 1 is going to be something we're going to need to take a look at in the future. So fire trucks are expensive, and we hope we don't have to use them, but we have to keep up on those. So I just want to put that out there for some of you. That will be coming as more and more of a discussion as we talk about the fire department. Questions so far?
On equipment like the fire engines, if I remember right, we were able to sell that decommissioned equipment to another fire unit. Is that something that we can do, or do I not remember that correctly?
Yeah, we do that when we're able to. I don't know if that will be the case with engine 1. Tom's saying probably yes, that another department will probably use it. Unfortunately, you know what you get from them. Right. But yes, we should be able to do that. I believe we did that in the past with an engine, and we didn't previously have a ladder, I don't believe, did we? Yeah. Was that the ladder a replacement? Oh, okay, so Huron took our ladder truck, so.
So Al and I have both joked that we've both been here long enough now. This is our second engine number 1 replacement, so.
So how many engines do you have to go through before you? Engineering, we have.
On the fire station, the
Sorry.
debt service, is that out until like 28, 29? Is that when we done with that? Is that a 20-year loan?
28, I believe, is when we're done with that, yep.
Okay.
That's, I'll throw one more little wrinkle into all of these discussions again, but that's another one that's a little bit interesting that I've kind of taken the lead on. In our report, you see that debt. The state doesn't consider that a debt because we voted it with an opt-out. Technically, it's a year-to-year appropriation that we don't have to pay it. If we don't, the bondholders are going to come and want the fire station. And I don't think our intention is ever that, but so I still show it as a debt. We aren't required to by codified law because of the way it was set up as a opt-out. That's the same with the Huther Family Aquatic Center, because that's on a year-to-year lease type basis too. Based on the success so far, I don't think we're ever going to want to give that pool to somebody else and quit paying on it, but that is a slight wrinkle that I've changed just to remind you that we still owe that money, and we're going to be paying it.
Not unless you want 75 water walking women banging on your door, Al. I don't think nobody wants that. Engineering typically doesn't have a lot of capital, but we do have a GPS system in 2022, GPS system in 2022, and make sure big enough so I can see it. So a lot of our ability to survey now requires 2 people. And this piece of equipment, as I understand it, would allow surveying to be done with 1 person. So I'm really starting to get, I guess, a little bit protective of our human capital and our ability to find and keep the folks that we have that have training, knowledge, expertise. As people move on and do different things in their careers, we certainly, we will find other folks, but if we can have the same job done by one person as we can 2, that type of equipment will pay for itself. So we're trying to leverage technology a little bit to make our lives easier and to make up for some of the fact that, it is tough to hire engineers. It is tough to hire surveyors. I'm just kidding, guys. But, we want to make sure we have equipment to that makes folks, when they're there, being able to effectively do their job. Tim Garvey used to say when he started working here, he'd get 2 pencils a year, and that's all he got. That's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but we need to start equipping our people with the technology to use, that they can use to do their jobs as efficiently as possible. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Streets, we always have equipment to replace and upgrade. We have some money for the building upgrade. You'll remember that we purchased that, was it called Hardscape building near the street shop. So we're going to have Joe Morrow use some of Joe Morrow's talents to help Adam determine what's best to occur in that building and how to configure it. It needs some repairs, so you see some funds allocated there. We also have an equipment trailer, a portion of a backhoe, also an asphalt box that we have budgeted for next year. The backhoe is one of those, there's a few pieces of equipment that we want to make sure we always have that are well maintained and in good shape. And so we always want to make sure that if we were prioritizing those specific pieces of equipment, and the backhoe would be one of them. Snow and ice removal, we do have capital budgeted. We have a replacement of a snowplow and a snow box, as well as some radios. Probably in the future we'll combine streets and snow and ice. It's one department, but for the time being it's staying as it is. City Hall, I wanted to talk about a little bit. City Hall is an old building. But it's an oldie but a goodie. We love our building and all its quirks and its fantastic idiosyncrasies. We've been working for a couple of years with the help of Joe Morrow, who's part-time for us, on a rewiring project for City Hall. So that's in the budget, as well as for this year and next year, as well as some masonry repair. So just when talking about the building in the historical easement, just some, we're doing some what I would call minor masonry repairs, and we have that amount, $60,000 budgeted for that repair. So we need to take care of the building. The building's in pretty good shape. It was funny because Pre-COVID, I complained a lot about how separated we all were and how we were each in our little boxes and we were very closed off. And then as it ends up, we were ahead of everyone else when it came to designing a building for COVID because we all had our separate spaces and we could stay away from each other for the most part pretty well. So City Hall worked out well for us in that regard. So we are going to suggest spending a little bit money there. I thought you'd also be interested in the mural restoration line item. So if you've ever come in to the north doors there, you've seen that there's a big mural there kind of telling the history, depicting the history of the community and of the area. Brad Beese has noticed and suggested that maybe that needs a little TLC going forward. So we're looking to identify appropriate artists, et cetera. So it's not in next year's plan, but down the line we should look at that because that is really nicely done and it's an important part of our building's history. Any questions so far as I take a drink of water or comments?
I feel really bad. I don't know what mural you're talking about. I probably walked by it 1,000 times.
Yes,
Never
right
stood
before in the foyer of City Hall when you come in to go vote or something. If you look up, there's a big mural.
Oh, I have to look up?
Yes, a little bit.
Oh.
And it tells a nice story. And Brad Beese actually has a very interesting description. If you ever want to pull him out of his office and have you give him that description, it's very educational. And I hate to, if he's watching, he's probably going, yeah, he wrote the summary, so he knows a lot about it. It's nicely done. Other questions?
I had a quick question on the replace the backhoe, the 25%, 50%. I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we split that up between the departments that use it. So streets, water, and wastewater all pay for a portion of that. Because all those departments are, well, they're the main departments that use that.
So it's just a breakdown from each department?
Correct.
25%, okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you, I appreciate it.
And you mentioned Joe Morrell's name a couple times.
Yes.
What is it that he's all doing for us? Or is there more that we have to look forward to in this yet that he's also doing for us?
Well, Joe is one of those unique persons that he has a lot of talents. He's working for Dwayne right now in IT, so he's doing a lot of IT, but he's also working on this wiring project. He'll also probably kind of be a consultant to Adam when it comes to some of the things we can do building-wise, because he spent a career as their building official, so he has a lot of knowledge about, the structural integrities of buildings and which walls can be moved or should be moved, and he has a good vision for that. So, and he's just a person that has a lot of good general ideas. So if there's something that we don't know what to do about, we will often ask Joe. And Joe might have an idea or have come across it somewhere in his years of experience. So this is one area where at times retirees come back and they can really be very helpful to us and also help mentor other employees.
Doesn't he also provide the soundtrack for City Hall? I hear him whistling when I'm in the building.
Yes, that's either Joe or Ross, depending upon what the time of day.
It's also why I'd like you to keep that in mind 10 years from now when I want to come back on a part-time basis. It'll be strictly to blame Kyle for all this debt that I feel bad about.
We have special jobs for you, Al, setting up the chairs for budget. So under traffic control, I don't have a lot to talk about there, but I did want to mention, so you saw there's in an out year $50,000. One of the things that we brought up in a budget meeting, a few years ago now, because it wasn't last year, it was the year previous, was putting the technology in our school zones so that right now when we're delayed or late, Adam or Corey Potts go out to the actual signs themselves and control the flashers. So this would be the technology to allow them to run that remotely. So depending upon the year, it might be once and it might be a lot of times, but I didn't volunteer myself to learn how to do that. So,
I think that is definitely one item that if we do have an opportunity, whether through one-time monies or otherwise, if we could pull that up from such a far out year, I think it would be hugely beneficial. Maybe we wouldn't be able to make it happen as soon as this fall, this winter, but it's one of those things, the sooner the better. Only because I'm one of those that's also seen firsthand what could potentially happen if folks from the city aren't able to make the change in time, and we are dealing with potentially deadly weather conditions and kids are walking to school. It's one of those things that we don't ever want to see happen, but I think it's also 50,000 is what we're potentially guessing as a dollar amount for upgrading the school crossings. Even if it were to approach that dollar amount, I think that's a pretty small price to pay. The convenience is one thing for city staff, not having to go around manually to each and every crossing. But the potential life savings as well is a pretty big deal, in my opinion. So the thought would be to maybe move that up from 2024 if we have funding available to do so.
I would jump in on that. That's one that we've talked about every year since I've been on the commission, and it just gets pushed, which happens to things. But if there is an availability to move that forward, I think we should look at that.
yeah, that is the kind of feedback we're looking for in this meeting. So we will take a look at that when we go back and re-engineer. Also, from school safety is the primary point of that, correct? And, our shop folks are probably plowing or taking care of snow and ice removal if that's the case. And so is it the highest and best use of a city staff person to spend, I don't know how long that takes to do, but to be out there doing that change as well when they might be able to be either helping with snow removal or doing something else, so.
And that's entirely a city expense. School does not participate in that at all?
Yeah. Yep.
Adam, can you give us a guesstimate? What does it take your staffer to go around to the school crossings and manually open each box and digitally update the date and time so that it accounts for a 10 a.m. late start, for instance?
So it depends. There's times two will go after it, tackle it. There's times 3 of them will go after it. There's times 1 will go after it. So it varies. I suppose anywhere from an hour to a half hour. And the more notice we have, obviously, the better we can attempt to get it changed.
They also do that on daylight savings as well, so. Are we ready to move on to airport? If so, airport, you see expense there budgeted next year for a loader, as well as a tug replacement at the airport. We also have, excuse me, I missed the pavement repair. We always have some portion of the budget allocated to pavement repair out there. Questions about airport?
In an out year, it shows airplane as an expense item.
And don't tell Jake, but, that's one of those things. I had a couple questions today about something like that in another department. It was actually in cemetery, but, so if there's ideas or thoughts, we do put them in out years to talk through them with you all. And that, might be part of a strategic planning conversation, but the age of having, well, Dave, do you want to take that, or maybe even Mike? Oh, yeah.
Testing. So what we're seeing in aviation is the need in communities our size for instructors in order to continue to promote aviation as for the use as business and for pleasure. And we're finding more and more instructors do not own their own airplanes. So the theory behind having the city own an airplane would be to make sure that we have one available so that we can continue to promote aviation by having instructors be able to travel to Yankton and have a plane available for them to teach. So in days gone by, all the instructors always had their own plane, and that's not the case anymore. It would also be available potentially for rentals, but that's why we kept it in an out year, and that's actually a price based on a used airplane. So we don't know where that market's going, but just another part of the discussion we can have to promote aviation.
So if something like that is with the business plan, do you recoup any money, or is that entirely subsidized?
So I would say the goal in that instance would be to break even. We'd have a rental rate established that we'd depreciate the plane out over time and try and more than break even a little bit on fuel costs and insurance costs so that we could cover some long-term part of the expenditure of owning an airplane. But the goal is to promote activity at the airport, so it's a little bit of a marketing tool also.
That's also something that Joe could do, is test drive airplanes for us. We can ask him if he'll do that. Yeah, Joe and Dave, I'm out on that one. I'm going to share power there. We also have we've done a lot of capital. Another thing that we don't talk about, I don't think enough, and we should, is the amount of improvements we've made in the airport over the last couple of years. And this year and next year, you'll see is no different. Where the percentage is there for your benefit, what our portion of that cost is. So what's shown there is our portion of the cost. So we have some very big investments into the projects that are being done out there, but we also have very great grant assistance from both the FAA and the state. So we have some good investment out there. Chan Gurney is a well-known airport in our region, very respected and well-run. So it is a big asset to our community. I'll talk a little bit about the Senior Citizen Center, although there's not a lot of capital in the budget for next year or this year. We keep pushing out the parking lot. So, a lot of people will say, well, I thought that was in the budget for 22, or I thought it was in for 21. Well, if we go take a look at it and it looks like it's holding up and in good shape, we don't replace it just because it's scheduled. So sometimes we get things that last longer than we plan. And so in which case we move them out. So because we know we'll always have things that don't last as long. And I think it was last year or the year before where we had some HVAC replacements and things like that we had to do in that building that weren't planned. So that's how those decisions are recommended. In the library, you can see that this year there's a lot of change, and that's because Dana and her staff worked on getting a grant, and they were successful to get a $100,000 grant for some technology changes, which is very awesome for the library. So some projects that were just kind of wants are becoming realities this year. So purchasing some new computers and digitizing the microfiche, for example, are some of the things that we're going to be able to do because of that grant. So that's exciting for us and gives us some nice upgrades.
Amy, the digitizing, is that going to be the newspapers, or is that other things as well?
I think it's the whole, but Dana, why don't you let the commission know?
So we have, is that okay? We have about 600 some reels right now of newspapers. And so the project, what we budgeted for was about 400 reels, and so that's mostly going to do the P&D. But we have that from about 1880s through about 2016, I believe. So the project, the portion that we're doing right now is for those P&D microfilms. And then we have the potential in the future that we could add on more. We have some reels of like census data that you can find online, so we chose not to do that. But we could, eventually we could add to that, or we could digitize things like yearbooks or city directories, things like that. So right now it's just the microfilm.
So will that be part of the online newspaper resource that I currently go to look at old newspapers? I forget what it's called.
So the company that we're going through, they actually build, host, and maintain a website for this. So we'll have a link on our website that you can get to these things. We won't have, the P&D isn't going to release copyright on those papers likely. So you would still have to come into the library for the more recent ones, but you could access them digitally.
Great project, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and when we really don't know what to do with the call, we're like, maybe transfer it over to Joe and see if he knows what we should do there. So he is a wealth of knowledge. Also in library, I'll just remember, you see it all there, but it's out there. We have not abandoned ship on thinking about new library, new future, what that could mean. One thing that I think Todd and I probably learned this year is a new facility isn't just build a facility. I mean, I feel like I thought once it was built and being used, it was like we're done talking about it, but no. So it's a monumental task and multi-year task. So when that comes forward and is brought forward in the community as a desire to you all, I know you'll let me know what path to take on that. So just don't want to forget about it, that it is something that we want to continue to talk to the community about. Speaking of parks and recreation, talk a little bit about some what I call boring park stuff, but it's stuff they need obviously to do the job. Lawnmowers and things of that nature are budgeted, trucks, so that the folks can get around and maintain our parks. We do have playground equipment budgeted in 2022, and that will be the West Side Park. We believe we have grant money coming for that. The rest of parks, we always have a few things budgeted. Not a lot of capital, but a few things budgeted. But we're really seeing a transition in parks to become our capital improvement plan changes based on the partnerships that we have. So, you know, our focus changes based on where folks want to invest and what partnerships we want to make. So you don't see a whole lot of capital in the parks until you get to West Side Park in 2025 even, but we are aware that there's going to be a contribution given to the city for West Side Park for a substantial amount. We also have a private donor who would like to see would like to make an investment in West Side Park. So as that starts folding together, I'll be asking the City Commission to help partner with that so we can really leverage those dollars and develop some of the plans that were made by the community in the West Side Park long-term plan. So you'll be seeing a little change there when it comes to West Side Park. I know parks are usually an area where you all like to make suggestions or observations, and some of our capital projects in the parks often end up from this discussion. So I wanted to give you some space to tell us if there's other big priorities you have. If we can fit them in and focus on them, we certainly will try.
I'm going to go with 2025, and thank goodness Charlie Gross isn't here, because you'd probably give him a heart attack seeing 3.5 million as a total down at the bottom there. Are all of those pretty much, like we've talked about other items, they're just kind of out there sitting in the idea parking lot as we need to keep them on our horizon, or are you really looking at all of those projects having to be done in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're out there as possibilities, but I think because of the expense of what the capital is in parks, the reality will be many of those projects will come from partnerships. So it'll be city and, a foundation, or city and interested group, like we've seen happen in recent years with Sertoma Club or with the Yankton Baseball Association. So they're all planned, they're not in stone. And I honestly thought we'd be focusing a little bit more on some of the improvements we talked about maybe 4 or 5 years ago in Sertoma Park now. And there have been some improvements made, but fully developing that park is probably, the budget shifted a little bit because we have somebody interested in investing in West Side. So when we have those opportunities, we should take them and work with those folks that want to help us out. So we'll be talking about that quite a bit here in the next few months.
With the COVID recovery funds, are we seeing any opportunities that could perhaps apply to our parks? I've been reading some states have been utilizing them. I'm not so sure about cities.
I have not seen that. What I have seen mostly from ARP and from the infrastructure bill would be primarily that our funding would be spent in an enterprise fund for infrastructure. Now, could that mean that there's some funds that maybe become more available for other things? Perhaps, yes, but I think they'll be assigned specifically to a project. So I have not read anything like that. And I'm seeing head shakes in the negative from Lisa. So if you have something to pass along, I'd take a look at it. Marn Creek, Huther Family Aquatic Center, we're not going to spend a lot on capital, just unless we need more chairs or more dipping dot containers or something like that. But we hope not to have to spend a lot more on capital there. So Marn Creek, you can see some big numbers there. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about expanding a contract with Banner Associates for some work on Marn Creek, and then we are hoping that we're going to have some construction projects to plan as well as execute in 22 and then going forward. Adam or Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about the stormwater improvement engineering / construction that's in the out years? Just maybe a general description of that concept.
Sure. As many of you know, we're going through a fairly extensive process with FEMA as far as our floodplain management mapping is concerned. We have a work map that FEMA has submitted to us for review. We disagree with substantial portions of that work map that FEMA has given us, and it appears that we're on track to have our only means of response to them is to invest in some of our own hydrology analysis to attempt to refute or get things adjusted in a manner that we think is more reflective of what's happening in the community or what could happen in the community. So that's what that is, substantially, is an investment in some design engineering hydrology through the corridor in the community that's most impacted by the work map that we currently see from FEMA.
Thank you. If there's no questions there, we'll talk a little bit about the Bridge and Street Fund. Cedar Street Bridge is our next big bridge undertaking. So we'll be working with DOT on the bridge improvement grant or big grant to follow through on the bridge reconstruction or replacement there. Also, we believe that there'll be more bridge funding coming through the DOT from the infrastructure stimulus bill. There'll be more information on that, I'm sure, in the months to come, but that may change where we are in our Bridge and Street Fund. But we also have to be able to handle the budgets or the projects that we budget. So we have to be able to execute the things that we budget as well. So we also have to keep that in mind when it comes to all of our budget plans. We have a couple of things in dispatch. They're not large, but they might catch some people's eyes, so I wanted to offer a little explanation. We have a laptop. We're working on ways where we can have sort of redundancy for dispatching remotely if that needs to happen. Also, there's a treadmill in the 911 dispatch, and I was asked about that. So I wanted to explain, we're not paying our dispatchers to go for a jog. Our dispatchers have to stay in a room, confined in a room. It has restroom facilities. It has, eating facilities where they can, make a cup of tea or have a meal break. But they have to be they have to be physically there for 12-hour shifts, and so we want to provide them with the ability to get up, stretch their legs, move a little bit. So that's what that is about. And then we come to water utility. So you can see in water utility the capital that's planned. You see that there's a percentage of the backhoe there in the water utility budget. We have some piping in the new plant budgeted as well. And then as you get down further into the budget, you can see a couple of the water main projects that are planned for next year.
Amy, going back a little bit to the Meridian Bridge inspection that's on an out year, is that something that we just have on a schedule that we do every X number of years?
The underwater inspection is every so many years. We have to do underwater inspection of all of our bridges. So that's what that is the underwater. So in the past, we've talked about a bridge inspection. So, we can have a discussion about that again if you'd like. A bridge inspection for the Meridian Bridge would chew up a lot of our capital for 1 year. We haven't had probably an estimate given to us now in a couple years about what that would be, but we know it'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars to fully inspect. And then there'd be follow-up with the inspection. So we are doing some repairs on the south side of the bridge. I think we've recently received an estimate for some of the concrete pillars that just have some, I wouldn't necessarily say it's structural repairs, but some spalling of the concrete and things like that that just don't look very nice. And so we're making some repair there. But if that's something the commission would like to talk about further, that's probably worth saying, yes, we want to talk about it and putting it on another agenda for a discussion.
It's something we'll have to get serious about at some point. I don't know that we have to this next year, but
Correct.
it's a monster we will have to face eventually. Amy, along with the water utilities, I know the old water treatment plant, plans for an RFP to find future use for that got stalled during COVID when we thought we might need that space. Is that something we can look to rekindle here this year?
Yes, I think so. I have to ask Dave where we are with did we execute our contract to have the building studied?
The structural analysis is completed, the geotechnical analysis is pending.
Okay, so we still need to do the geotechnical analysis if you didn't hear that, but the structural analysis is pending. So once we have that, that's something we could bring to the commission. What that was consideration of an RFP to go out for proposals for that old, I guess I want to say old water plant, but the 1928 plant, if there's a commercial or other type of use that the commission wants to consider for that. If we're ready to move on to wastewater utility, I will. You see some of the EDA project in water utility because they're not totally separate, but the primary portion of the EDA project, of course, is in wastewater. In wastewater utility, you see, again, a portion of that backhoe shared across the departments. as well as this year funds in the GIS collection mapping, modeling, and then construction for the EDA projects in this year's budget and then the following 2 years. So those will be a big undertaking. You also see the design and construction management there in the budget. So I think we've talked a lot about those projects. If you want to ask more questions, we certainly can. But we have talked a lot about those types of, those improvements.
Amy, I will give you a kind of a 9-10-minute warning.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, for giving me that warning. So I will tell the commission that we're only a few pages away from being complete. At this point, I'll ask you if you'd like me maybe to give the commission a break and then go through a few more of these pages to finish up in the regular portion of your meeting under my city manager's report, or if you prefer to take care of this after your regular business meeting, or if you'd like a new work session entirely. Some of you, I realize, may need a biological break before our next meeting.
Thoughts?
I'm fine with wrapping it up during our regular meeting.
Agreed? Yes. All right.
Okay, so with that, then, thank you, and we'll talk more then about, if you have questions with wastewater, and then we'll be moving on to cemetery and finish up during city manager's report. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Leon. With that, I would take a motion to adjourn the work session. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And anybody abstaining? All right, our work session is adjourned. We'll meet back in about 10 minutes.